Nestled deep in the heart of the Ghanaian countryside, the village of Asantman hummed with life and history. The vibrant community, surrounded by thick forests and the gentle sway of palm trees, had existed for centuries, thriving on the rhythms of tradition. Every aspect of life, rituals, celebrations, and communication, was carried through the deep, resonant beats of the drum. It was said that the pulse of the village could be heard in the echoes of the drums that reverberated through the trees, calling the people to gather, to celebrate, or to heed a message. Amma, the village chief's daughter, had always felt the weight of her birthright. Her lineage came with expectations to uphold the family's honor, to lead the village with wisdom, and to marry strategically for the good of the community. However, Amma's spirit was anything but bound by tradition. She was a firecracker, full of ambition and dreams that stretched far beyond the village boundaries. Each day, as she walked the dirt paths lined with towering trees and vibrant flowers, she felt the suffocating pressure of a future already written for her. Her heart yearned for freedom, the chance to experience the world beyond the village, to explore her own passions and destiny. But the legacy of her father, the chief, loomed over her like a shadow, a reminder that duty was her guiding star. The village itself reflected the unity of tradition and duty, where every individual knew their place and every action had meaning. The elders sat under large, weathered trees, discussing matters of importance while young children played in the dirt, learning their roles from an early age. It was a community where the pulse of the drum was the pulse of life itself. The villagers communicated not just with words, but with the rhythm of the drums, which carried messages across the land in ways that words never could. The intricate beats told stories of joy, sorrow, and warnings. Kwesi, a young man with an innate talent for drumming, was one of the most skilled practitioners of this ancient art. It was said that his beats could carry the weight of 1,000 words, and he was entrusted with delivering important messages between villages, whispers of peace, urgent calls for help, or simply the celebration of harvests. Kwesi's role was sacred. He was the living link between communities, the bearer of tradition, and the keeper of his people's most valuable communication tool. Yet, despite his duty, Kwesi had dreams that often lingered in the quiet spaces of his heart. He longed for more than just drumming to deliver messages. He wanted to experience the world, to find his own rhythm outside of the expectations tied to his role. But no matter how strong his personal desires, he couldn't shake the heavy weight of tradition that bound him to the village. His loyalty to his people, to the role of the drummer, and to his ancestors was a thread too strong to sever. His hands, skilled at crafting patterns with the drumsticks, carried the weight of his responsibilities as much as his heart carried the weight of unspoken dreams. Amma and Kwesi, though living in the same village, existed in different worlds shaped by the roles they were born into. Amma's internal battle between the pressure of her family's expectations and her longing for a life of her own was in stark contrast to Kwesi's deep commitment to his ancestral duties. Yet, both shared a common thread, the desire for something more, something outside the limitations of their destinies. As Amma observed the life around her, the daily rhythm of the village, she couldn't help but feel the constriction of the path her father had chosen for her. She was expected to marry the village's most powerful suitor, to continue the line of leadership, to be a symbol of strength for the community. But her heart was not in this life of duty. It longed to explore the world beyond Asantman's borders, to see the landscapes she had only heard about in stories, to dance to a rhythm that was her own. Kwesi, on the other hand, had no such luxuries. The village needed him. His family needed him. His drums spoke for him when his voice could not, and with each beat, he carried a sacred duty that filled the space between his personal desires and the expectations placed upon him. Though he dreamt of exploring other aspects of life, of forging a path outside the confines of the village, he could not ignore the responsibility that tethered him to his people. He was, after all, a drummer, one of the few who could communicate the ancient messages between villages. His heart felt heavy with this duty, knowing that the future he longed for seemed unreachable as long as tradition called him to stay. The village of Asantman, with its vibrant culture and deep ties to the past, held both Alma and Kwesi in its embrace. They were products of their heritage, shaped by the drums, by the land, and by the roles that fate had bestowed upon them. Yet within each of them lay the stirring of change, a desire to redefine their paths, to break free from the chains of tradition that held them both captive. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village of Asantman as the day began to wane. The rhythmic sounds of the drums, so familiar to the villagers, echoed through the dense forest that surrounded the village. For Kwesi, it was a place of solace, a quiet, sacred space where the weight of tradition could be momentarily forgotten. Deep within the forest, away from prying eyes, he practiced. The forest, thick with towering trees and vibrant green underbrush, served as a sanctuary where the pulse of his drumming felt most alive. Here, the ancient rhythms came easily to him, his hands moving over the drum's surface with a fluidity that seemed to merge with the earth itself. Kwesi was lost in his world, the beats flowing from him as naturally as his breath. His hands caressed the drumskin, crafting complex patterns and melodies that carried the stories of their ancestors. The sound was deep and steady, filling the air with an energy that seemed to dance with the wind. Each beat told a tale, a warning, a message, a celebration. But today, the rhythm spoke only to Kwesi's heart, echoing his silent yearning for a life beyond duty. Unbeknownst to him, Alma, too, had found herself drawn to the forest. The sounds of the drum had reached her ears as she wandered through the village, her mind weighed down by the heaviness of her future. The beats seemed to call out to her, pulling her away from her thoughts, beckoning her deeper into the woods. Her curiosity, piqued by the hypnotic rhythm, guided her steps toward the source of the sound. With each footstep, her heart quickened, her spirit drawn in a way she couldn't explain. When she reached the clearing, Alma was struck by the sight of Kwesi, so immersed in his music that he seemed to be a part of the very rhythm he created. His body moved with the flow of the drum, his feet tapping in sync with the beats, his face serene yet intense in concentration. His drumming was not just a performance, it was an extension of his soul, and Alma, with her own longing for freedom and expression, felt it deeply. For a long moment, Alma stood in the shadows, silently watching him. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the leaves trembling in time with the beats. Her eyes were fixed on him, on the way he moved, the grace with which his hands struck the drum. She could feel the music vibrating through the air, through her own body, and suddenly, she understood it. The language of the drums was no longer foreign to her. It resonated deep within her being, as though it had always been a part of her. When Kwesi finally stopped playing, a silence fell over the forest. Alma's presence had not gone unnoticed. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. In that instant, something passed between them, a moment of recognition. Two souls who had lived in separate worlds, bound by their duties and expectations, now saw one another for the first time. Neither knew it then, but this brief glance would set them on a course neither could control. Alma took a tentative step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard of Kwesi, of course. His reputation as the village's finest drummer had spread far and wide. But seeing him in this intimate, unguarded moment was unlike anything she had imagined. It was not the figure of a mere tradition-bearer, it was a man whose music carried the weight of something far greater. Kwesi, on the other hand, saw something in Alma he had not expected. She was the daughter of the chief, bound by her lineage, and expected to follow a life of tradition. Yet, there was something in her eyes, something that spoke of a yearning, a hunger for something beyond the roles she was destined to play. He had known Alma all his life, but today, in the forest, he saw her differently. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Alma said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was filled with an unfamiliar awe, as if the music had cast a spell over her. Kwesi smiled, his gaze steady and calm. "You didn't disturb me. The drum calls to everyone in its own way. It has a way of finding those who are meant to hear it." The words hung in the air, and Alma felt a strange sense of comfort in them, as though the drum had not only called to her physically but to something deeper, an unspoken connection between them. She took another step closer, drawn to the rhythm she now understood so clearly. Kwesi lowered his drumsticks, his expression thoughtful. "You seem to understand it, the language of the drums?" Alma nodded, her heart fluttering. "It's strange, but it feels like it's been inside me all along. I can hear it in my heart." Kwesi's eyes widened slightly, and a flicker of recognition passed between them. Could she really understand the rhythms as he did? The idea seemed impossible, but in that moment, Kwesi found himself intrigued. From that day forward, Alma and Kwesi's paths intertwined in ways neither of them could have predicted. Despite their differences, Alma's noble heritage and Kwesi's place as a humble drummer, their shared connection through the language of the drum began to bridge the gap between their worlds. Every encounter sparked more curiosity, more fascination, and a growing understanding of one another. But the journey ahead would not be an easy one. The weight of tradition, the disapproval of their families, and the expectations of their roles in the village would continue to loom over them. Yet, in the quiet of the forest, amid the rhythms of the drums, Alma and Kwesi found a moment of peace. They shared an unspoken bond that defied the boundaries of their worlds, one that would soon lead them down a path that neither could turn away from. After that fateful day in the forest, Alma found herself unable to stay away from the rhythmic pull of the drums. Each day, as the sun rose and set over the village of Asantman, the sound of the drums seemed to beckon her, drawing her closer to Kwesi and the world he inhabited. What had once been a mere curiosity had now become an all-consuming passion, one that spoke to something deep inside her, a longing for freedom, expression, and connection. Alma began visiting Kwesi more often, seeking him out in the quiet moments when the village was still and the rhythm of life slowed. She would find him in the same clearing, or by the firelight, his drum resting at his feet, ready to be played. At first, Kwesi was hesitant, unsure of how to teach her the ancient rhythms. His role as the village's messenger through the drums was sacred, and he had never shared the language of the beats with anyone outside his craft. But there was something about Alma, her intensity, her natural grace, and the way she had connected with the drum from the very first moment, that made him willing to share his knowledge. He started by teaching her the basic patterns, the simple beats that formed the foundation of all messages carried by the drums. Alma listened intently, her eyes closed, her heart attuned to the pulse of the rhythms. She quickly discovered that the drums spoke to her in a way words never could. Each beat held meaning, each pause a space for reflection. It was a language all its own, complex yet beautifully simple, powerful yet full of nuance. Kwesi watched, amazed, as Alma's hands began to mimic his movements. She had a natural rhythm, a deep understanding of the beats, as if she had always known them, hidden deep within her. With each practice session, the two of them worked together, her hands slowly learning to strike the drum with precision, her body swaying to the rhythm as though the music itself was a part of her. The sounds they created were no longer just practice. They began to form a language, a dialogue between two people who had only just begun to understand each other. Over time, Alma's confidence grew, and so did the depth of her connection to Kwesi. The act of drumming, once an individual expression for Kwesi, became a shared experience. As they played together, their differences began to melt away. Kwesi's structured, disciplined approach to the drum was balanced by Alma's free-spirited energy, and together, their rhythms created something unique, a fusion of tradition and innovation, discipline and passion. Their practice sessions often turned into long hours spent in the peaceful solitude of the forest or in the quiet of the night by the firelight. The drumming became their shared sanctuary, a place where they could speak without words, a place where they could be free from the weight of the expectations placed upon them by their families and the village. The beats of the drum carried their emotions, their fears, their hopes, and, most of all, their growing affection for one another. The language of the drums became more than just a form of communication. It became the metaphor for their relationship. The beats were complex, intricate, and layered, much like their feelings. Sometimes, their rhythms were fast, urgent, their hands a blur as they played with excitement, mirroring the thrill they felt in each other's company. Other times, the beats slowed, their hands moving in gentle, contemplative patterns, reflecting the quiet moments of understanding and tenderness that passed between them. Alma began to see the drums as a mirror of their love, a love that was not without its challenges, but one that was deeply intertwined and inseparable, like the patterns in the beats they played. There were moments of discord, of frustration, but always a return to harmony, just as the rhythms of the drums always found their way back to their foundation. In this way, the drums became a reflection of their growing bond, a connection that was built not on words, but on something deeper, something that transcended their individual worlds. Kwesi, too, found himself changing. In teaching Alma, he realized that the language of the drums was not just a tool for communication, it was a way of living, of connecting with the world around him and the people in it. Alma's presence in his life, her passion and her unrestrained joy, taught him to appreciate the beauty of freedom within tradition. He had always believed that duty to his people was paramount, but through Alma, he saw that there could be room for love, for expression, and for change. The drums became the heartbeat of their relationship, a rhythm that pulsed through their every interaction, binding them together in a world that often tried to keep them apart. They were learning, not only the language of the drums, but the language of love, one that didn't need to be spoken, but felt deeply in every beat. But even as their connection deepened, they both knew that their relationship was fragile. The village was watching, the whispers of their forbidden bond growing louder with each passing day. Despite this, they were no longer afraid. Together, through the language of the drums, they had found a strength, a unity that transcended their individual fears and doubts. The love they had uncovered in each other was becoming more powerful than any tradition, more enduring than any expectation. As their rhythms grew in complexity, so too did their hearts, drawing closer to a future that neither had dared to imagine before. The beats of the drum, once a simple tool for communication, now carried the promise of a future together, one where love could speak louder than the traditions that sought to hold them back. As Alma and Kwesi's connection deepened, so too did the undercurrent of tension that began to ripple through the village of Asantman. What had started as a quiet and personal bond between two souls soon became the subject of intense gossip. The people of the village, bound by tradition and close-knit social structures, couldn't ignore the growing closeness between Alma, the chief's daughter, and Kwesi, the humble drummer. The disparity in their statuses only fueled the whispers. Alma was the embodiment of nobility and tradition, while Kwesi was an outsider, bound by the rhythms of his craft and the duty to serve the village. At first, the rumors were hushed and fleeting, quiet conversations behind closed doors, whispers between the elders, and nervous glances exchanged during village gatherings. But as their secret meetings became more frequent, so too did the scrutiny. Alma's father, the village chief, was the first to hear the gossip. He was a man deeply rooted in tradition, his authority and his lineage paramount. His daughter, poised to inherit the future leadership of Asantman, was not meant to marry a humble drummer. His heart was heavy with the realization that Alma's defiance of her prescribed future could cause unrest, not only in his family, but also in the village itself. Alma's mother, a woman of grace and dignity, voiced her concerns more subtly. She often reminded Alma of her responsibilities, urging her to be mindful of her duty to the community and her place within the royal bloodline. "The world is watching you, Alma," her mother would say gently. "You carry the future of our people on your shoulders." Kwesi, too, felt the weight of the expectations placed upon him. As a drummer, he was seen as a messenger, a servant of tradition, and his bond with the chief's daughter was seen as a direct challenge to that tradition. His father, a respected elder in the village, had always taught him that his purpose was to serve the people and maintain the integrity of their customs. But Kwesi couldn't ignore the pull of his heart, and the whispers from his own family grew more pointed with each passing day. His father, who had once encouraged him in his craft, now warned him to focus on his duties rather than pursue a relationship that could disrupt the balance of their community. Despite the mounting pressure from their families and the village, Amma and Kwesi's love refused to be extinguished. The fire that burned between them only grew stronger with each passing day as they continued to meet in secret, finding solace in their shared dreams of a world where they could be free to love without the chains of tradition holding them back. It was one such night, beneath the quiet glow of the stars, when their connection reached a new intensity. Kwesi had been tasked with sending a message to a neighboring village, using the ancient language of the drums to convey important news. As he played, his hands moving with practiced precision, Amma sat nearby, her heart attuned to the rhythm of the beats. She had grown so familiar with Kwesi's drumming patterns that she could now understand the nuances of his messages. As Kwesi's drum beats filled the night air, Amma's eyes widened in realization. The rhythm of his drumming, which had once been a simple conveyance of messages, now carried a deeper meaning. She could feel the urgency in the beats, a distinct pattern she recognized as a call for rebellion, a call for action against a neighboring chief who had long oppressed the villagers with his harsh rule. The message was clear. The people were rising, demanding change, and the drums had become the rallying cry. Amma's heart raced as she listened, knowing that what they were hearing was not just a message, it was a moment of history in the making. Kwesi's drumming had become more than a simple transmission of information. It had transformed into a symbol of resistance. The message that had been sent through the drums was not just to one village, but to all those who would listen. It was a call to arms, a declaration that the oppressed would no longer stand idly by. Amma felt a deep sense of conviction. She knew that this was a turning point, not only for the people but for her and Kwesi. The drums had always been a medium of communication, but now they were a tool for change, for revolution. Their love, too, had become a symbol of defiance, a refusal to bow to the expectations placed upon them. Kwesi, sensing Amma's unease, stopped drumming and looked at her. He could see the determination in her eyes, the realization that what they had uncovered was not just a secret message, it was a movement in the making. "Amma," Kwesi said softly, "this is bigger than us." Amma nodded, her hand finding his in the darkness. "We can't ignore this," she replied, her voice steady. "The drums are calling us to act. It's time to stand with the people." Their bond, once a quiet and forbidden love, was now intertwined with something larger. It was no longer just about their desires, their dreams, or their love for each other. It was about the future of their villages, the breaking of oppressive chains, and the hope for a freer, more just society. As the night wore on, the air seemed to hum with the energy of the drums, as if the world itself was shifting. The echoes of Kwesi's drumming reverberated far beyond Asantman, carrying the message of rebellion across the land, a message that would soon be heard by all who longed for change. Amma and Kwesi stood together in the silence that followed, knowing that their love had transcended the boundaries of tradition. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and resistance, but they were no longer afraid. Together, they had found their purpose, and together, they would face whatever came next, united by the power of the drums and the strength of their love. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on Amma and Kwesi's hearts. They stood at a crossroads where two worlds collided, one built on love, the other anchored in duty. The village of Asantman, with its ancient customs and expectations, demanded that they conform. Yet, their hearts could not be silenced. What began as a forbidden love, hidden in the shadows, had grown into something far greater, an unstoppable force that echoed through the beats of the drums and the rhythm of their souls. Amma's status as the chief's daughter meant that her future was tied to the village's prosperity and its continued adherence to tradition. Her marriage was meant to secure alliances, uphold family honor, and keep the village's power intact. But Amma's vision had shifted. She no longer saw her life as a mere extension of her father's legacy. She saw it as a chance to break free, to forge a future that was shaped by love and justice rather than obligation and control. Kwesi, too, had been bound by tradition. As a drummer, his role was to uphold the ancient ways, to communicate the village's needs, and to serve as a silent voice in the village's history. Yet, his heart longed for something more, something beyond the confines of ritual and expectation. Now, faced with the choice between loyalty to their village and loyalty to each other, Amma and Kwesi could no longer ignore the power of their love. Their shared dreams of a better, freer future, one where people could love without fear, where justice could rise above oppression, became a vision worth fighting for. It was no longer just about them. It was about the people of Asantman, the oppressed, and the dream of a society where love could flourish without barriers. The drums, once a means of communication, now carried the weight of their defiance. That night, under the cover of darkness, Kwesi played his drums with a fierceness that reverberated through the village. The beat was strong, steady, and unyielding, each stroke of the drum sending a message far beyond their village, echoing through the hills and forests like a clarion call for change. Amma stood beside him, her heart pounding in time with the rhythm. With each beat, she felt the stirrings of a revolution that went beyond politics, beyond tradition. It was a revolution of the heart, a fight for love and unity. As the echoes of the drums rang out into the night, their message was clear. The village's oppressive traditions were no longer a force to be reckoned with. Amma and Kwesi had chosen to rise, not just as lovers, but as symbols of resistance and change. The message carried in the beats of the drum was a call to arms, a call to resist the old ways and fight for a future where love could exist freely, unburdened by the chains of tradition. Amma and Kwesi stood together, hand in hand, knowing that this was not just a moment for them, but for everyone who had ever been silenced, oppressed, or forced to conform. The drums, the heartbeat of their love, carried a power beyond anything they had ever imagined. It was as if the entire world had paused, listening to the echo of their revolution. The villagers, once bound by the old ways, could now hear the call to change. The power of love had become a weapon, and the unity they shared was the spark that would ignite a fire of transformation across the land. As the night wore on and the drums finally fell silent, Amma and Kwesi realized that their love was not just their own. It was the pulse of a new world, one where love and duty could coexist. Their union was not a rebellion against tradition. It was a testament to the fact that tradition itself could evolve, and that love, in its purest form, could bring about the change that was so desperately needed. They had defied the odds, broken the chains, and created something beautiful, a legacy of love, hope, and unity that would resonate long after the drums fell silent. In the quiet that followed, the villagers began to emerge from their homes, moved by the resonance of the drums. Some stood in awe, others in fear, but all felt the power of what had just transpired. They could not ignore the force of the love and rebellion that had swept through their village. Amma and Kwesi, standing together, knew they had ignited something that would change the course of their future. For in the end, they realized that sometimes the most profound revolutions begin with a single heartbeat, and the most powerful messages are carried not just through words, but through the rhythm of the heart and the beating of the drums.